Hey all. So I decided to also make an extra bonus video. This video is going to be a little bit different from the other ones that I have. This one's going to be a tutorial. And what the tutorial is going to address is, I would say, a common problem that I see in Elixir packages that you can get off of the package manager hex.pm. And I have to say that I myself am quite guilty of this because I have not implemented this code or anything similar in any of my packages except for one or two of them. So the phenomenon that I'm talking about is this. You find the GitHub page for an Elixir library and you look at the README, and the README is out of sync with the main part of the what's up in hex, and the version number is wrong. So that's one problem. Another problem that we'll also be able to solve along the way is integrating it so that if you have any code blocks in your README, the code blocks will be up to date and at least checked by testing. So hopefully you set up some sort of CI where you can't push to master, or you at least check before you manually check or something before you update to hex. So this way, whatever you push up to your GitHub repo is going to be in sync with hex, and the version numbers are going to be correct, and all of the code that you have in your README is going to be correct in the context of the current version of your code. You see, with doc strings in documentation, you can very easily do that. But if you've got some sort of raw markdown content, then that's not so easy, and it's not provided by default with you for Elixir, as far as I can tell. There may also be a package to do this somewhere. I just haven't really looked that hard. But it's so easy to roll your own that I thought it would be a worthwhile tutorial to make, and plus it's instructive on how to do some really cool things in Elixir, and you'll get to see a lot of those kind of neat little bits and pieces as part of this tutorial. The last thing I want to say is that you can also embed markdown content in your documentation in other sections of your docs, for example guides, and if you want to ever have your guides be checked so that those stay updated, then this is also a strategy that's pretty easy to expand into that, but I leave that as an exercise to the watcher. Okay, so let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to make a new project. So we're going to do mix new readme consistency. We're going to cd into that directory, and then refresh VS Code. Let's take a look at this. So this is the sort of expected README file that we're going to have. And notice it has this like section where it says, hey, like if you want to get this from hex, add this to your deps line. So let's write a test against this to at least make sure that the consistency, make sure that at least this version number matches the version number here. Okay, should be pretty easy to do. So let's hijack this test, and I like to do things with somewhat interactively, so just first make sure that that's good, 0 failures as we expect. Okay, so first thing we want to do is let's take a look at this. I love this thing that Elixir gives me, which is dir. I don't trust that whoever is running my code is necessarily going to be in the right directory to use file.pwd. So if you want to know what that is, file.pwd, right? Or sorry, file.cwd. I don't trust that to be correct. So in the correct directory whenever this is running. But what dir does is it produces the absolute directory of the file itself, and we know that README is going to be one directory up from this test. So let's go ahead and do that. Join No guarantees that this works in Windows. Let's just run that real quick and note that it will have that ugly dot dot still in there. We're going to want to use this function, path.expand, to get that correct. Okay, so I'm going to assign this to a value, so readme path. And let's also do this, external resource. So this is a special module attribute that you can set, which means that if this the file pointed to it, this path changes, it'll trigger recompilation. I actually don't think you need this in EXS files because they're recompiled every time you run, I think. But since I'm not entirely sure about that, one way it can't hurt to include that, and it's kind of a nice trick to know that you can do. So let's do this, readme path. Let's read the contents of that and just make sure that that's doing what we expect. So file.read. And boom, that is exactly the contents of what we have. Of course, new lines are /ns. Probably what we're going to want to do next is we're going to want to split them by lines. So string.split, pretty simple, and that is what we expect. Notice that that our code is gated by these elixir triple hash or triple backtick thing, and they're ended by another triple backtick here. So let's go ahead and do this. To pull that content out, we're going to need a reduction. So enum.reduce, and I'm going to want to create some sort of state. Let's call this init state, and then we're going to line and then state. It's going to give us something. Okay, so init state, let's make that be, we're going to track two things. We're going to track the code blocks, and that's going to be a list of all of the code blocks that exist that are Elixir code blocks. And then we're going to also want to track whether or we are in a block, or at least in an Elixir block, and we're going to start that out as false. Okay, so here's the logic. If our line starts with Elixir, actually, let me just copy paste this. So if our line starts with Elixir, and I am kind of want to be a little bit defensive about whether or not there are extra spaces behind it, right? So we're going to want to instantiate a new code block, and let's make sure that in block. Actually, now let's not run a check there. So what we want to do is we want to instantiate. We're going to substitute states code blocks with state.codeBlock. With an empty string, right? And then we're going to want to make in blocks to true. Great. So that's what happens when we start an Elixir code block. If we have a simple backtick, right? I'm just going to copy this. Then what we want to do is we want to merely set in block to false. And we can remove this. The only other case that we really care about is if we are in block, then what we want to do is we want to prepend the content of the line to the first thing to the current block that we're looking at. So code blocks is going to be this and rest, and in block is true. So we're going to want to do, actually we're just going to code, we're going to do state, and then we're going to update code blocks to be this, concatenate with a new line, concatenate with the line that we care about. And then of course we want to keep the rest of the code blocks that came before it. And then in the case where any other case, all we are going to do is keep the state the same. I think that should be enough. Let's take a look at what happens when we run this. Awesome. We got this out of it. And so let's grab that out. Map.get code blocks. Great. So that's exactly what we want. So let's do a couple dummy checks. Let's say that I want to do something like bash hashbang bin/sh bash do something. So that should be ignored. Great. If we just have a simple thing, which is some random text, we also want that to be ignored, and it is. And then we also want another function and then that should show up. Okay, two things that we should notice. First, that both of these lines have this like preceding new line, which I think we probably don't want. And the second thing we should notice is that they're in backwards order. So let's do this. Enum.map string.split string.strip. Let's double check to make sure that that does what we expect. And then the last thing we want to do is enum.reverse. Great. So that is wonderful. The next thing that we want to test is that we want this depths function to basically wind up being instantiated inside of our README. And the test that we're going to run is test that depths are consistent. And then we're going to want to do depths. And for now, we'll just inspect it. And test that. And of course, we're going to get this undefined function depths. So how are we going to do that? Well, we've got this list coming off of the end of this pipeline. Let's do this. enum.each fn code line or block code block. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run this function code.eval string. Binding means if there are any variables that we need to bind into this evaluated string, we put them in there. We don't have any bindings because ideally each of these README content should kind of stay, or each of these blocks in the README that we're pulling off should be able to be executed by itself with no sort of external help. So let's put the code block in and then put no bindings in. All right, still a problem. Cannot invoke def outside of a module. So it's trying to evaluate this string, which has a def in it, and it kind of doesn't know where to put it. So how so in theory, we would think that this should be able to like execute in the environment of this module and drop that def function inside of the module. Well, that kind of doesn't work, but we can make it work. And here's how we make it work. So notice that this last thing is options. This last parameter to code eval string, which is options, and that can be either a keyword or macro.env.t. If you don't know what a macro.env.t is, it tells you what the compiler environment is in the area that you are in the code. In this case, we want the compiler environment of this module itself. So let's go ahead and pull that. So compiler So that saves the compiler environment to this compiler environment variable. And let's pipe that in here, or drop that in here. And boom, we got it. So this is what we expect. README consistency 0.1.0, and that is defined in the deps function that comes out of this. So we've literally we've taken this string and dropped it inside of this module. That's pretty fantastic that you can even do that at all in Elixir. Cool. So let's go ahead and write our test. I think that's a fantastic thing that we should do. So let's fix the spelling on that. Okay, so how are we going to check that this is the same as what we expect? Well, where are we going to get the version from? We're going to get it from this project, mix project. And so all we have to do is run this function and grab the version out of there. So let's do that. Copy. And then I'm going to just inspect this. And so you can see line 33 comes out as this. So let's get the version. Version string. And so now we've really pulled that version string out. And then let's also go ahead and grab this. Now these are going to be tuples. And, there are some cases where you might want to add stuff onto the end of this. So for example, you might want to add like runtime false or some other sorts of like decorators on the end of this, or like test only environments is force it so that you only are loaded onto environments. So we can't count on this being a two tuple. But so let's do this. So we're going to just grab this and list that first, and then we're going to elem1. All right, so let's just make sure 33 and 28 look the same. The last thing is that we've kind of got this like weird like version control thing. And so to deal with that, and I actually don't know how to do this off the top of my head, we're going to use the version module. I think we can do this. Parse 0.1.0. Oh, right. Okay, so let's just see what happens when you do that. So that gives us a version struct. Beautiful. So what we're going to do is we're going to, let's go ahead and actually turn this into pipeline. So keyword.get version, and then we're going to take that and then we're going to version.parse it. And so version. Let's take a look at what happens when we do that. And then note that there's also this parse requirement function there. We're going to use that down here. So let's do that. Great. And then we're going to do version.parse requirement. Make sure that that works. Beautiful. And then how do we check to see if the version satisfies the version requirement? So let's find out. I don't really know. So match question mark? Yeah, that looks like it. So assert version.match. Does the version match the version requirement? The requirement should be here. Yes, okay, great. So let's do kind of a sanity check here. So I'm going to test that again without the io.inspect. And let's make this 1.2. That should still match. Great, but if we make this 2.2, that should now mismatch. Beautiful. Okay, so now we have achieved version consistency. Awesome. So that's kind of stage one of what we want to do. Stage two is that we have this. So we've got this second one, and let's just make sure that that works. So if we execute the function foo, then it does its thing. So test foo function works. Defined, well, I'll call this internally defined function works. Assert okay equals foo. And that works just fine. However, kind of the issue with this is that you can't really show in the README file itself that that the values are what you expect. And so if you do a doc string, you've got those IEX prompts that you can use to match values up against expected runs. Let's do this. So it's kind of a pain to really go through and define those sorts of things like that. So maybe we do this instead. So def bar do bar, and then we're going to write a test. Bar returns bar, right? And then so this way in your README documentation, you can include a test that actually represents what's going to happen. All right, so that's, and we need to do an assert. And so if this works, then we expect to see 3 tests, 0 failures. And of course, if this doesn't work, right, so if we make that Baz, it should say 2 tests, 1 failure, or 3 tests, 1 failure. Great. All right, so that works beautifully. And now, much like our doc tests, we have a system where we can define content and execute it. I'm going to do one more just to show you that this is useful outside of the realm of defining things in its own module, right? So I'm going to do test external module, right? And then obviously this should work if you know how Elixir works. But so notice that the module here is README consistency test, and we do have this README consistency function in lib, right? And this is kind of still the default one, and it's hello. If you execute the hello function, it'll give you world. So let's just write that into our README. So hello, README consistency consistency.hello. So let's just make sure that sort of thing works. I'm going to do one more, and the last one I'm going to do is just kind of like something fun. We're going to define a module inside of this. And the point of this is if you have some sort of framework where you want to create a situation where you can define a module and then do something with that module, you can still use this sort of like a context to build that up. So does something. So like, let's say your library defines some sort of using statement. You want to show yourself using something. So like, use my library, right? Okay, we haven't defined that here, but you could in theory. And then we're going to def foo do bar. And we want to do does something dot foo. And we're going to do that. Cool. Let's take a look at that. And oops. Test external module is already defined, right? Internal module. Okay, so that should work. So now we have 5 tests, 0 failures, right? So all of these different strategies work. Just FYI, you know, I do want to point out that the name of this module is actually going to be not what you expect. It is going to be README consistency test dot. So let's do this. Function assert function So if you don't know, this is a way to check to see whether or not a module exists in Elixir. Function, I forgot what the name of this function is. Function exported. Oh wait, that's not going to work because this hasn't been exported yet. Well, just make sure that that works. Let's do this. Does something io.inspect. And let's just make sure that that is what we expect. So note that the module is actually README consistency test that does something. So just be careful when you do this sort of a thing that you're aware that the namespace might not be what you expect, because this def module is going to exist inside of the README consistency test def module itself. So it's going to wind up being in a concatenated namespace. Great. All right, so that's all good. What happens though if I do something dumb, right? And I make a mistake in my syntax. So let's say I do this, def bar do bar. Now the problem here is that it says compile error test readme consistently test EXS10. Let's go to that line of code. That line of code is here, and it's of course pulling the compiler environment from here. That is kind of not what we want, right? Because this is going to make debugging this not as, nice as if I had. What I really do want it to tell me is that, hey, look, this syntax error is coming from the readme.md line 32. So let's go ahead and implement that into this little tutorial. So how are we going to do that? So what we need to do is we need to take this m variable and then change it so that the line and the function the line and the file are not this. So let's take a real quick look at what is inside that m variable before we do that. And look, there's this line, it's struct, right? And there's this line parameter, and there's also this file parameter. So maybe we can do something where we tweak both of those parameters and give us what we want. So the first thing we can do pretty trivially is drop in the file into compiler environment. I'm going to do this up here. The way you do that is this, and the file is going to be readme path. So now what we expect it to say is we expect it to at least give me the readme.md. Look at that. That's fantastic. readme.md 10. The line number is wrong, but at least that's giving me the file, which is good start. So that really tells me that, hey, this is the way that I can kind of nudge these to be the correct thing. All right, so where can we get the line numbers from? Well, after we split these, we can do a enum.withIndex, and line numbers start with an offset of 1 instead of an offset of 0, so we're going to want to do that. Thing to be aware of is that these things are going to now no longer be strings, right? So if I just go ahead and like try and run this, we're gonna get a problem, and that is not the problem that I expected. But this is, oh right, because I see. So what happened was it matched with one of these things, and that's kind of not what we wanted. Okay. So let's go ahead and take these strings and then just kind of go ahead and match them this way. Hold on. Before I do that, I should probably show you what these look like, right? So that you get a feel of what we're about to do here. So drop the inspect there, and you can see that these are now like tuples of the line and then the number. Line number, line number, line number. That's what with index does. So what I want to do is at least want to match these against these things. And then that should be the same. So instead of having everything get ignored, at least we're going to still trap all of these things. We're just going to throw away we're just going to throw away the string parts. And why did that not do what I expected to do? It should still have dropped those things in. 10. Oh, right, good. It worked. We got the compile error right. So it means it's correctly processing all these things. It's just not doing the line number. What I want to do is I want to store alongside of the code block, I just want to store the line number of the head. So head line. So that's what I'm going to do. When I initiate this block, I'm just going to store the headline of that block. All right. So this is obviously going to have problems because all throughout, I'm going to have an issue where this is going to be incorrect, right? So head. So I'm going to destructure head line. I'm going to destructure the code blocks to match against this tuple, and then I'm going to put it back together at the end here. So that should work, except for the fact that I can't string.split strip this. So there we go. Oh, actually, you know, we've got this error where it says string.strip is deprecated. We should use string.trim. So let's change that. All right, so the problem here is that we can't trim something that is not a tuple, or that is a tuple instead of a string. So now we need to do this, code line, string.trim code line, enum.reverse, code block, and line. I'm just going to ignore it for now and just make sure that we still get that README.10 error, consistency test error. Right, we need to end this function. Great, so we're back to this point where we have this README error, and I'm going to delete this io.inspect. Okay, good. The great thing is that now we have this line info. So let's just just make sure that that is sane. Great, and it's blatting out the line numbers 10, 27, and 31. So let's just go back here and double check that those are what we expect. So yes, 10, 27, and 31. Beautiful. And don't know why 39 didn't show up. 39 and 45. Well, we'll deal with those later. Oh, because it got the compile error at this point and then it stopped. Good. Okay, great. So we can go ahead and delete that. And all we're going to do is we're going to graph the line information into this environment variable. And look at that, readme.md 31. Okay. However, the error is actually on line 32. The problem is that our code actually starts here, right? And we've supplied the line number for the elixir code fence. So that should be easy to fix. All we need to do is add one. And there we go. So now it says, hey, readme.32 only variables and / are allowed in function head. And if we go ahead and fix that, it's going to be okay. And if we go ahead and inject another error, we get undefined function error in readme line 41, or readme.md line 40. So why is that giving me the wrong number there? Because I believe we trimmed. Maybe it's better to not string.trim things and just output lines. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and then if we go ahead and oh, yes, that's right, because that's right, because it's actually correct, because if we do this, then it's the error is in line 41, but the test is on line 40, line 40, right? So, you know, if I have that, right, we're still going to get readme.md 40. This dark gray item tells you what the line number for the test is. And if there's an error inside the test, that shows up here. I forgot how elixir testing works. So this is fine. So, right, so if I give some sort of unidentified identifier there, it should still say 43, and that should be correct. Okay, so, you know, maybe what I'll do is I'll go ahead and put this in because that's kind of more correct code. So ignore that whole I deleted the trim and then deleted the +1. This is actually correct. There you go. So this, in short, is how one way of being able to take, you know, your README or any sort of markdown information, extracting the elixir content, and running tests against the elixir content, and making sure that your markdown documentation files are in alignment with the code that you have in your library. In a real situation, you might want to take this kind of monster of code and drop it into some sort of library, or some sort of external module, maybe in the support directory, especially if you're using it more than once. Hope that helped everyone. Have a happy holidays.